Thank you. Yes, that's one hell of a bell, actually. I had got teenage sons, so I'm thinking I might just put it in my back pocket and be quite useful at some parts of the day. Yes, so I've got a very short period of time to talk, and I'll just sort of rock and roll it. And the idea is that the best thing really is if you ask me questions. So if halfway through, you think that you've got a burning question and you can't wait, just stick up your hand and let's sort of turn this into more of a dialogue rather than a monologue, because that's always more interesting. So my writing instructions from Kerry, and she's not a woman to be messed with, so I'm going to follow entirely those writing instructions, is to give you my thoughts on the reading on the current sort of political situation in New Zealand. To be honest, it's a little bit of business as usual. It's sort of the more things change, the more things stay the same. I don't know whether any of you saw TV3 had a poll out last night. Reed Research does TV3's polling. It's one of the best polling companies in the country, and generally speaking, come election time, they tend to be pretty much on the money. They weren't last time, interestingly enough, but other times they've been right on the money. And they've got Nationals still polling at about 47%, which is what they got on election night. So that is phenomenal, given that we're looking at a third-term government. And there is something happening there, but it's just... And if you talk to the press gallery, and if you read closely between the lines of what the press gallery is saying, there is a turning off of the sort of miracle that is John Key, but it in circles of people that are kind of close to him and see him operating at close quarters. But that isn't really coming through in the general polls. Part of the reason for that has been the collapse of the Conservative Party. Now, for the short term at least, Colin Craig and his various problems, which I certainly won't go into, because that could take all day, but yeah, well, exactly, yeah. It's sort of like 50 Shades of Grey, but not that interesting. But his problems have seen the collapse of that Conservative Party vote, that much we can say. Now, that was 4.2% of the vote at the last election, and those voters have gone to National, which is exactly where you'd expect them to go in the short term. In the long term, that isn't a place that they're going to be happy staying, particularly as you see National change. There will be a day when John Key won't be the leader of the National Party. If that day was to happen tomorrow, the new leader would be Paula Bennett. Those really core Conservative voters are not going to stick around for a party led by Paula Bennett. So they've still got to find somewhere else to go. But in the meantime, that 4.2 is holding National support so that it looks like it hasn't fallen. There has been some slippage in the centre. Some of those people have gone back to or have transferred to Labour. They'd be some of the centre voters that swish about. The Greens are kind of holding where they were, which is not bad for the Greens, actually. And New Zealand First has had this remarkable rise. I know you can scoff at him, but he is the souffle that always comes back. And but there are two sort of miraculous forces in New Zealand politics. One is John Key, and the other is Winston Peters. And while they're both doing what they do so well, their parties will be the beneficiaries of that. So what is it that Key does well? I think Key is a combination of charm and good luck. No. Settle. After the ponytail thing, I'm sorry, but that was a bridge too far for this girl. But I think that he has got good luck, and he has got great charm with the public, and you see that all the time. But the luck of this particular government and his style, Key's style, goes back to how the media covers politics. Now, I, as a former journalist and as a former political journalist, this is something I feel very strongly about. But the media is going through very, very tough times at the moment. And what was the news business when I was involved in it, which was a business about news, has really become the news business, which is just about the business. So the news doesn't matter so much, and that's why we see more and more entertainment dressed up as news and less news as news. So there's not much reporting of policy. There's not much reporting of parliamentary debates. In fact, you'd be very hard-pressed to remember the last time you saw a decent report of a parliamentary debate or a select committee hearing. Those things are covered in some places. I mean, I know Hugh Humphrey's here today, and Radio New Zealand probably is the last man standing. And Hugh will forgive me for saying this, but Radio New Zealand's audience is a sort of narrow and quite discerning slice. For most New Zealanders now, they are not getting any political policy discussion and serious political coverage. And Key loves that, and that's what you've seen most recently. I mean, this is a Prime Minister who plays to the crowd. So he goes on the chat shows, he does the breakfast TV where he's not going to be challenged, he goes on the breakfast radio with the jocks and does the sort of horsing around a bit. He's attached himself to the All Blacks like no other party leader we've ever seen before. Key is all about the distraction and not about the main game. So it's a lot of sizzle, not much sausage. And in a way, it's the perfect timing because that suits his strength. He's not very good on the detail. He doesn't like having to defend policy or argue policy. He doesn't feel very strongly about most of it. The timing is perfect because the editors and the publishers don't want policy either. They don't want serious debate. So that's one of the things that's crowded out Labour. Now, there's a lot of things that Labour have done wrong in the last 2.5 terms. And one of them is they've had too many leaders and too much disunity and they've spent too much time thinking about themselves. But one of the things that's really tough on Labour is when they do come up with ideas, they find it very difficult to get any penetration in the media and any discussion on the policy itself because there aren't the places to go and there isn't the appetite for that. So we're in a period where this is the politics of distraction. You can see what happens. It's sort of a manipulation of the media's fragmentation, if you like, to serve the government's interest. Now, my personal view is that will last a long time, but it won't last forever. You can see if you look at Donald Trump, you can see if you look at Jeremy Corbyn, voters actually do get very tired eventually of being gamed by politicians. If they think that they're being played, eventually they will actually have a reaction to that. And we're no different, so we'll probably do the same thing in a way too, but you just can't see that happening in the near term. There are some worrying concerns for National. The confidence figures are down, the polling figures on whether we're on the right track are trending down, and as I say, we've had that slippage in the centre vote. But Labour has not been able to turn it to its advantage, and the Greens have found themselves slightly distracted by changing their leader. What do I think about James Shaw? I think that he is very untried. He got a very easy road from the gallery and from the media generally because he looks good, he's got a good CV, he looked like somebody who was actually going to make a difference. I don't know whether you've actually seen him speak, but he's okay, he's not spectacular. And he hasn't yet found what is his message. So the previous leaders, co-leaders of the Greens, Russell had a very firm message. He knew exactly what he was there to do. Jeanette, even more so. Rod Donald, of course, the same. I don't think James has really found what it is that he's meant to do. Materia Ture, by the way, very interesting woman. Seen as a hard left person, seen as very radical. She's currently on sabbatical in Europe. And she's gone on sabbatical to go and see and find out more about public-private social policy partnerships. And the reason she's done that is that the Greens have argued against those consistently. But she realises that they're going to happen and they better get their understanding and they better be able to work with them going forward. So she's really kind of trying to retrain some of her prejudices, if you like, during this period of sabbatical. And she talked to an audience that I was at recently very openly about it. I thought it was quite an interesting presentation because you don't see politicians very often saying, okay, I'm on the wrong side of this and I'm going to go away, I'm going to find out more about it and I'm going to come back because I'm going to have to work with that. So I think she definitely is one to watch and she will really be the driver behind the Greens' next phase. Kerry asked me to talk about Australia and the Malcolm Turnbull thing. Well, isn't it staggering? I mean, it's just amazing. You just got to love Australian politics just because it's so brutal. It won't make any difference, to be honest. The relationship between the New Zealand government and the Australian government is very strong at the moment. The problem with Australia, and this is something that certainly I know keeps Bill English awake at night, is that their economy is not in great health, and the things that are coming down the pipeline for Australia are not great either. So, on the one hand, we kind of like to have a go at our closest neighbour, and it feels good when they're praising us and everyone's looking to New Zealand to see what the solutions might be. But if you think about that for more than about 30 seconds, It's not great that Australia's economy is not doing that well. I mean, our economy is tied so closely with their economy, and a lot of small and medium enterprises in New Zealand really need those Australian customers. So we absolutely want the Australian economy to recover, and we really need a stronger government in Australia. I'm not sure that Turnbull's actually going to make it. He's got a really tough road ahead. So that's my 10 minutes. It was rollicking, it was fast. I'm happy to take questions on anything.
Linda,
Yes.
do you think that the Greens will gradually start migrating more towards the centre?
No, not really. I think that they tried that a little bit last term. I mean, I think the Greens have made the transition that they had to make. They were a really fringe dwelling party, and when they were a really fringe dwelling party, they got about 4% of the vote, and it would bounce up to 6%, and then come election day, they'd fall back down again. They are now a 10% party. That's a significantly bigger slice of the pie than they ever had before, and they've really sat there now. They're pretty solid at that 10%. And I think that's about what they are. The thing to watch with the Greens, Labour will never govern without the Greens. That is Labour's issue. And the Greens will never govern without Labour. So those two parties are going to have to develop some kind of accord. And, you know, if they were smart, they'd be doing it now. I mean, there are unofficially there are talks going on between the parties, and there are some in both parties trying to get that kind of memorandum of understanding arrangement going. But they have to create that. They have to manage that relationship, go to the public and say, this is how it's going to work. Because every election currently, what happens is we get all through the election campaign, and both the Greens and Labour have to answer over and over again is, what are you going to do with the leader of the Greens Party? What are you going to do with... I mean, it's boring, and it stops people getting past that into policy. But I think they are where they are going to be. I don't think they're going to be a crossover party and come into the centre.
What's your view on the TPP? Where do you think that stands, and is it really going to be a huge issue for New Zealand in terms of whether we sign it or not?
We'll sign it. There's no question about it. We'll sign it. I mean, there's too many other big economies in the tent. So we'll sign it, whatever the cost. I think there will be costs. I think that, I mean, this is again comes down to my point about how little debate there is. I mean, I think on the question of Pharmac, you know, there's a really important point of principle, because we have got this incredible model for buying drugs that the rest of the world looks to and is trying to find out whether they can emulate it. And we really need to be able to protect that. And it was very glib for Key to say, well, yeah, there might be some drugs that will cost more, but, you know, that's not going to matter. Well, when anything costs more that the taxpayer's paying for, it does matter, because, you know, we're all going to pay for that. Either we're going to give up something else, or we're going to have to pay more taxes. But, you know, the money doesn't just come off a tree, as we all know. But I don't think there's any doubt that if there is a deal on the table to be signed, no matter what it says, we will sign it. Yeah.
Social impact bonds. I'm finding Labour frustrating to work with at the moment, because I work for Treasury. I'm with the Association of NGOs, Aotearoa. So we did a roadshow around the country. We got input from hundreds of organisations, and they said, social impact bonds, let's give it a try, at least. When it comes out into the public domain, Labour are just going, no, no, no. And I had a bit of a stoush with the King about it, but it seemed mindlessly reactionary in a sense about something that had potential, which the community supports. Is that common with Labour? Is that?
I think that's common with opposition. So I think Labour does that. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but I think National did it when it was in opposition. And when they don't do it, and Key got a lot of mana when he was leader of the opposition for not playing it that way over the smacking legislation and sort of coming to find the common ground, you know, and people really admired him for that. It's like Andrew Little and the flag, you know, Key and Little arguing about what order you do the flag thing. So as a result, we're not going to get the red peak option put on the table. I mean, that it is petty. Regular folk can't understand it. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But one of the things about being in Parliament is a lot of it doesn't make any sense, right? You know, it's a kind of different kind of oxygen in that building. And once you get in there, it becomes tribal, it becomes personal. Labour's problem, one of Labour's problems, is that they've never, I mean, they don't like Key. They viscerally don't like Key. and they can't understand how someone that they don't like so strongly can be liked by other people. They just cannot get past it. And it's sort of like, when you have to say to your children, I mean, this is why, it's such a... sometimes I think it would be quite good to still be doing political reporting, because as a parent, when you're parenting, you kind of learn all these things that you would say to politicians, but it's impossible to combine those two roles, really. But anyway, I mean, often you want to say to them, like, just get a grip, just get some perspective. But politics isn't actually about perspective. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but often it's not. And you can get more perspective from working outside of the institution of central government than you can sometimes from working in it. And that's one of those examples. Yeah.
Do you think the current spread of parties is going to remain the same in the short to medium term, or do you envisage more people raising their heads? I know Generation Zero were trying to cause a bit of a drama, or increase their prevalence. We've got the rise of fascism in Europe again. I say fascism, of course, liberally. But you've got a lot more conservative views coming throughout the world at the moment. Do you think our regime is going to stay the same, or will they move and bend with the world?
I think that there has to be a vehicle for the Conservative vote. So I think, going right back to the 1990s when there was Christian Heritage and the Christian Coalition, they campaigned and they got 4.6% of the vote, or 4.3% of the vote, somewhere like that, in about 1996. And then last election, you saw the same thing with the Conservative Party getting 4.6. There is that solid between the 4 and 5, just under the 5% threshold, of what you'd say hardcore conservative, but they're sort of morally conservative rather than politically conservative. That vote has got to go somewhere, and there has to be a party for it. I don't think Colin Craig's going to get up to do it again. I think someone's going to have to come in and create another party in that space that he was at. But in terms of the volatility you're seeing in other parts of the world, I mean, one of the things, it's one of those things, we don't know how lucky we are. I mean, you probably do, but we have just not got the same tensions caused by waves of migrants and those multicultural communities, the tensions that you see in those multicultural communities, and we just don't have anything that is akin to that. I think that one of the great legacies of successive governments through the late 80s and 90s of both Labour and National was sorting out the treaty issue and actually kind of putting a lid on what could have turned into something quite different and turning that into an economic opportunity. And if you look at the Maori economy, the brown economy in New Zealand is doing incredibly well, and some of those big iwi organisations are running very, very successful and innovative businesses. And now, of course, that under the whānau order program, they're buddying up and running social policy on a scale we haven't seen before. Those kind of things are going to keep a lid on a whole lot of things that could have been quite messy for New Zealand, and we're very lucky. And we just don't have the other problems that other countries have just at the moment. Sometimes it's really great to be at the bottom of the world surrounded by ocean. Yeah.
Where is the place of the Maori Party in all of this?
The Maori Party is a party I kind of worry about, actually, in a way. I think they fulfilled a terrific... they were launched after the hikoi over the foreshore and seabed legislation by Tari Anaturia, as you know. And I think both Tari and Peter Sharples had a really clear vision as to what they wanted for that party. And it was a conciliatory, cooperative voice sitting somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. They weren't able to realise it to its full potential because they could never actually raise the money and to have the organisation that you need to run a political party. So it ran off... To say it ran off the smell of an oily rag is to overstate it. I mean, it was the smell of an oily rag. They just have done it on nothing. Marama Fox is terrific, but I don't think that she has the mana and the reach in the wider Māori community to be able to pull in the favours to run that party. And to Ururua Flavel, who never really wanted to be leader, but ended up being leader because he felt that he needed to put his hand up, otherwise he was going to be ignored. He just has, he's a really fantastic guy and a man of high integrity, but principally he is not going to stand up and fight for things. It's just not the way he does things. He likes to get everybody around the table and talk about it. and he's not going to make the cut through. So I think that party is one that could actually fade away at the next election. And I think that will be a pity, and it would be nice to think there was something coming in the wind that would, or in the wings that would replace it, but I don't see that yet.
One more burning question, Martin.
What's the appeal of the New Zealand First Party other than nice old fellow with a nice smile?
And the gold card.
I think he's not that, actually. I have a lot of admiration for Peters, even though, you know, I've spent a lot of my career as a journalist chasing his tail and trying to persecute him, really, to be honest. But the thing about Winston that I admire is, and I mean, I know there are people, particularly who covered things like the Wine Box, who would take a different point of view from this. But I think with Winston, what you see is what you get. And he offers an old-fashioned conservative with a C brand, which is, it is a little bit nostalgic. It is about simpler times. His solutions are quite simplistic. But it is about a New Zealand that probably doesn't exist anymore. But for a lot of people, that they honestly wish that it did. And I'm going to say, like, I would never be a New Zealand First supporter in my kind of private capacity. But I kind of understand that nostalgia, right? You know, when he stood up at the last election and said, when I went to school, when I was a boy, there were people who went to school barefoot because they were so poor. And I don't want to live in a New Zealand where where children are so poor they go to school barefoot. That really means something.